Good morning. We're going to have a modified Sunday, meaning we're going to come together as a whole congregation. Our pastor and assistant pastor are going to lead us in our Sunday session. Don't worry, we're still going to come together. We're going to have time for prayer requests, things of that nature, prior to coming together as a whole group. The idea for what's going to happen on Sunday is to focus on the intergenerational experience. Now, because we're having a modified Sunday, I wanted to ensure that we went over Sunday's lesson. I thoroughly enjoy teaching from Out of the Formations books. This is a next Sunday resource, and so I've grown to really like the authorship, the penmanship, and the message that's conveyed from out of using these materials, and what it's done to be able to share this with the class. You know, for the month of August, we've talked about family matters, and one of the things that we're going to wrap up August with is something called legacy. Now, I know that you guys have got your study guide. As you're listening to this very brief lesson, we're not going to go for the full 45 minutes, but we are going to do the Cliff Notes version, if you will. So we're reading from the book of Numbers, chapter 27, verses 1 through 11. This lesson can essentially be broken down into two distinct components. The first component is the daughter's request. And the second component is the Lord's response. Reading directly from the Student Bible, which is a New International Version. Chapter 27, verse 1 says this: The daughters of Zelophehad, son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, belonged to the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They approached, verse 2 says, the entrance to the tent of meeting, and stood before Moses, Eleazar, the priest, the leaders, and the whole assembly, and said, Our father died in the desert. He was not among Korah's followers, who banded together against the Lord. But he died for his own sin, and left no sons. Verse 4 says, Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he has no son? Give us property among our father's relatives. Verse 5 says, So Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord said to him, What Zelophehad's daughters were saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives, and turn their father's inheritance over to them. Verse 8 says, Say to the Israelites, If a man dies and leaves no son, turn his inheritance over to his daughter. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan, that they may possess it. This is to be a legal requirement for the Israelites, as the Lord commanded Moses. So looking at the first component, the daughter's request, verses 1 through 4. The situation was, as we've gone through Scripture, Zelophehad had all daughters, no sons. So the daughters make a request. They go to the tent of meeting. They look at Moses. They address Eleazar, the priest. They address the assembly. They address everyone and say, this is the situation. My daughter, or my father has passed. He did not turn against the Lord. He died for his own sin. And that being said, they had no land. There was no allotment to them because he had no sons. Under the current law, there was nothing that they were going to receive. Now in Scripture, it doesn't talk about they were worried about financial responsibility. I can imagine that they were, but it doesn't mention that they were concerned about financial well-being or financial responsibility. What they were concerned about is their father's legacy. They didn't want their father's name to die away because he had no sons. You see, in biblical scripture, if land wasn't given to the son, the family name was written out. It was like there was no existence at all. So in verses 1 through 4, Zelophehad's daughters, they plead their case. They plead their case to keep their father's name around by asking for the allotments of land to go to their uncles, which would in fact be inherited to them. So Moses thought about this, and you can see it. You can see it in Scripture. Moses did not have a decision right then and there. Who did Moses go to? He went to the Lord. Scripture says Moses went to the Lord. How interesting. I know in today's world I get caught up in making split-second decisions. What if I began to practice a little more about forgetting my decision-making capability and focus on prudence and going directly to the Lord? I think we can all do that. But in Scripture here, we know that Moses did. He went directly to the Lord. And with Moses doing that, received direct instructions on what to do. In verses 6 through 11, we see the Lord's reply as a result of verse 5, Moses going and getting help from the Lord. The Lord's reply was, or God's reply was, that the daughter's request was a valid request. It was valid. If there were no sons, if there were no males, if there wasn't a descendant who could legally lay claim to the land for the daughters, in addition to that, God said this was going to apply to all of Israel. So again, two things in the Lord's reply, God's reply. One, the daughters had a valid point. And two, the law had to apply to all of Israel. As a result of that, God gave specific instructions on the inheritance when a man leaves no child. Now that's our scripture lesson for today. Without going for a prolonged period of time, go back and reread those words. And what's it saying to you? To me, what's being said is that things can change. God changed it right then. God changed the existence for Zelophehad's daughters right then and there. Maybe you're experiencing something that needs to change for you. Shall we all use the lesson of Zelophehad's daughters as a way to grow closer? I hope you all have a wonderful week. And we'll see you on Sunday.